Well, hello and welcome to our ISE Fireside webinar. Our topic today is delivering zero trust with a SASE platform. And we're absolutely thrilled to have ForcePoint as our sponsor. So many thanks to ForcePoint. We are actually with those folks last night in Chicago at an ISE private dinner. So we love our partnership with ForcePoint and appreciate that. We have a wonderful panel today, and we're going to hear from each of our panelists with some introductions and appreciate all of you joining us as well. I want to make mention of our agenda. So we'll be having some great discussions. But again, as I mentioned, we'll have our panelist introductions. And I love when our panelists do their own introductions versus me reading a bio out there. We also will hear from Jim Fulton, who is with ForcePoint, and he's going to share a little bit of all the great things that are happening with ForcePoint. Then we'll jump into our panel discussions, and we promise it's going to be very engaging, very interactive, informative. And we want to hear from you via our Q&A in our Q&A session. So as you're thinking about something top of mind, please put it in the Q&A chat window, and we will get to as many questions as possible during our Q&A session. So as you're thinking about it, please pop it in that Q&A chat window, and we'll sign off at 2:50. I want to make mention also that we will have a survey available, and we always love your feedback, but also by participating in the survey, that will allow us to have us know that you'll need a CPE credit so that we can send over your letter confirming that you had joined us today. So pop that in the let us know in the survey, and we will get that out to you by tomorrow morning. And so you can keep up with your CPE credits. Continuing education is so important. And I know at this time of year, we're all kind of scrambling to maintain those certifications because we've had some busy times. So let's jump into our speaker introduction. So first, Gabe Lawrence. Gabe, thanks for being with us today. We love having you, and I like your picture, and I like how you look. So it's good, looks good. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Marcy, and thanks, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So I'm the VP of Information Security Cyber Protection for Toyota Motor North America. It's a long thing. And my teams are responsible for building secure solutions from the beginning all the way through the development process to delivery, testing. We also do the monitoring and incident response, identity management, and manufacturing systems. So I've been actually on the zero trust journey since before those words were meant anything, starting a long time ago. Early on when I worked in the university, everything on the internet means you have to think like zero trust. So it's kind of in my DNA, and I've been doing it for the last couple of years. So I'm real excited to talk about this today.
Well, thanks for being with us. We really appreciate it. And Harshal Mehta, we're glad to have you here with us. So tell us a little bit about what you've got going on.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on the webinar here. Hi, everyone. Harshal Mehta, CISO at CWT. Been in this industry for more than 2 decades. My role as CISO is to manage the entire security stack, reporting to the audit committee and the board. I think as the board is advancing and learning new buzzwords, zero trust is something which they have recently learned. And, it keeps us on our toes on what's happening with zero trust, what's happening with SD-WAN, SASE. So we're going to talk great about all of these buzzwords and covering. We are on the journey as well, to be pretty honest, with significant partners and vendors. It's a big risk for us to manage and have a fully implemented zero trust. So excited to be here.
Well, thank you for, again, joining us. And Jim Fulton, love to have you. I'm glad that you're with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we're excited to hear what ForcePoint's got going on.
Well, thank you, Marcy, Gabe, and Harshal, and everyone for joining us today. This is going to be a fun topic. My name is Jim Fulton. I run product marketing and analyst relations at ForcePoint. We're done so for most of the last decade. Been in cybersecurity for almost 25 years. One of the things that we're particularly excited about this topic is really what motivates ForcePoint and why we exist. We're a data security focused company that exists to help organizations let their people, who are now coming back into the office and working remotely and working everywhere, to in fact work anywhere with data that now is spread everywhere in the cloud, on the web, in private data centers, all around, and to do so safely and efficiently. And what gives us sort of the background in this is we were one of the early adopters of SASE. And so we have a cloud-based platform that really combines Zero Trust and SASE to deliver this data security everywhere, if you will. And in fact, we have customers who have measured sort of cost cutting, cost savings of up to about 31%. So it's been recognized by analysts as our platform's a leader in the Forrester Data Security Platform Wave. We're a visionary in the Gartner Single Vendor SASE wave as well. So very cool topic. Thank you, Marcy, for hosting it, and looking forward to a great set of conversations.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. And your segue is perfect for our first topic that we'll be talking about, is really the SASE journey, the deployment over time, how it offers, control and cost management, as well as just a clear path to Zero Trust, if that's, the path certainly you want to go. But the cost control and the cost management, I should say, and the control is really, to me, one of the things that stands out and embarking on this type of journey. So you are allowed to manage, we're always being asked right now to do more with less, especially right now. And this is what kind of, when we were brainstorming on our call, preparing for this session, and putting the content together, but the technology investments that all of us have out there, they're looking for ways to cut costs. Okay. So there's digital resources everywhere across the board, and people are just trying to figure out how to, again, manage the stack, consolidate it, and get more out of the technology investments just across the board. So Harshal, I really do want to start with you. In this journey, the SASE journey, with the control for deployment and to simplifying, our security stack, we are doing events across the country, and this is literally the theme of every dinner, even if it might not be the theme of the dinner that we're hosting. But how are you prioritizing and balancing the deployment of these capabilities of these new technologies out there versus, swapping in the legacy products? Because, it's kind of hard to go back to your board just a couple years later and say, oh, we've got to completely rip and replace. It undermines sort of the credibility that you've had, but you also want to take people forward and ensure that their investments, are being spent or invested wisely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you mentioned about cost cutting and the measures we have to take in the current economic conditions. I think the biggest, apart from cost, is optimization of your resources. With the economic conditions, everyone's now leaner, and we don't have like 20 people managing, the tools. So I think from our journey perspective, our business trigger was, apart from managing cost, how can we make this a leaner stack? A leaner stack which would help from an efficiency perspective. I think Jim mentioned is, as users are coming back and, data is everywhere, one of the things which we as a security professional try to improvise is the efficiency and the experience side of the house. How can we make that experience of users working remotely much more efficient, rather having multiple hops, multiple tools in the ecosystem, which just, takes the system, compromises the system's, utilization or capacity. So I think that's the biggest trigger for us is, apart from cost and efficiency, make it a leaner architecture. It helps from a SASE perspective is everything it's at the perimeter, and you have less tools to manage. The SASE tool has gone through a significant enhancement and advancing where everything can be managed through a signal stack rather than an endpoint managing DLP, a web control solution, a secure web gateway, and so on. So it's a good selling point when you go to your technology and business folks to say, not only this solution is going to provide more security, but it's also going to improve the user experience, which is a big buy-in for remote workers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because that, when you come in there full throttle of that kind of presentation and that message, I think it brings forth a clear, concise picture of where we need to go as an organization. I'm always trying to always look at things with the glass half full. So I want to switch over to Gabe a little bit. Well, looking at that glass half full kind of mindset, I think the best time for us to shine and show value add and purpose and justification and even leadership across the board is when we're being asked again to do more with less. So we're asked, and as security executives and professionals out there, we have the custodian, we are the custodians of our company's infrastructure and data across the board. So how are you approaching a zero trust principle to deliver, data security when data is now everywhere your business goes across the board? And how are you giving that freedom, of data everywhere, but having that peace of mind, across the board with a zero trust and securing that information?
Yeah, and I think it's right to your point, right? I think we're at this place where a couple of things have come into alignment that help us focus and make these decisions that maybe we wouldn't think are advantages, right? COVID forced everyone to have to work remotely for a period of time. That forced us to think about how do we create policy and access to our resources that aren't based on you're in the office, which honestly wasn't the best security model to begin with, but it was an easy one, right? And the evolution of the tooling over the last couple of years of understanding zero trust has allowed you to embed policy decisions about what data and what type of which role and what activity a person in your environment is trying to do, so that you can really define clearly what are those access rights they need, what is the data they're allowed to get to, what is the things they're not trying to get to, and the broadening of support of that across tools. Couple that with SASE and all the other things that are sort of internet native out there, and you're at this point where it could be super complex. You could have to go do everything again, but almost all of your stack is starting to learn how to talk to each other and understand that policy. And I think it's a great opportunity that unusual in the security space. We're able to make things easier and more secure at the same time.
Absolutely. Jim, I want to kind of shift over to you because, we talked about timing here, and Gartner, has recently predicted that by 2025, that 80% of the enterprises are going to adopt a strategy to unify the web and cloud services and private application access using a SASE or a SSE type of architecture out there. And this is really up from about 20% from 2 years ago. So there is phenomenal growth, and again, that timing being right. So do you think, this is attributed to the security stack needing to be easier to manage because of the complexity that we put out there and sort of throwing everything out there very quickly during COVID so that we could work remotely? Or, I'd love to get your insights because you talk to so many folks out there in the industry. You handle the analyst relations, but you also talk to a lot of customers across the board. So this is not something I'm a big fan of collaboration, at the end of the day. And that's why we're together today. So love your thoughts.
Well, it's actually really exciting, and Gabe is so spot on that during the pandemic we had this great exodus of people and applications and data. And Harshal was talking about that as well. And so now, as the pendulum is swinging back, it's not going back to 2019. It's going into yet a new direction. And so, while SASE was originally proposed, it was kind of an academic exercise. It got basically put on steroids or on a fast track during the pandemic because it addresses exactly the issues that Gabe and Harshal were bringing up. That when you look at how you provide access and usage of data that now is located everywhere, the old approaches of having lots of fragmented systems with separate sets of policies, separate sets of consoles, separate sets of dashboards, it finally fell over. And when you combine that with the You know, we've been talking about sort of IT resource high and staffing challenges for years now. You know, that all just kind of came together in a perfect storm and fell over. And so customers are telling us, as they were looking at it, is first, I don't have enough people to train them on 70 different consoles, right? I just can't. And I can't have 70 sets of policies because of the gaps and redundancies. And so what is evolving now is a recognition that a lot of these different security systems are trying to solve, frankly, the same problem, just with a slightly different twist. You know, it's okay, you've got applications in the cloud that are storing data. You have applications on the web that are storing data. You have applications in a data center that are storing data, and people are trying to get to it. And so what's really happening is people are understanding that by taking a new approach that brings these things together, you not only simplify the IT, but Harshal was spot on that the real focus that this is delivering on, uh, and actually this is something that's a particular thing that I'm proud of, that's different about ForcePoint, but more importantly, I think for the entire security industry, yeah, we got to look at it as, when you do security right, it's about enabling people to be more productive. It's enabling to use the information they need wherever they need to use it. And so it shouldn't be and about the hoary cliche that just causes the hair on the back of my neck to go up whenever I hear a vendor come in and start with, let me tell you how many hoodie wearing bad guys I'm going to stop for you today. All right. Hate that. The issues should always begin with, look, you want to make more money, you want to spend less money. So how we're going to do that? We're to help you be more productive, or to help streamline operations so that you can have people focusing on the business issues, not on, which of 70 different consoles do they need to go connect the dots to today.
You bring up so many great points, and it's a perfect transition to our next topic, Jim, which is really the simplification of zero trust security with a data first SASE there. And, one of the things I really think is interesting about zero trust data security itself is the philosophy of never trusting, but always verifying, because that, to your point of all these different things out there, they're not integrated, they conflict with each other, and they're just sometimes even overlapping or kind of throwing out data points over here that are just complete contrast or junk with, another system. So, and the reality, as you talked about, across the board, I can't imagine. I mean, I have a flat panel monitor, I have a smart TV here, I have a computer here. We all have like multiple things going on. But how many consoles can you look at one time and interpret all this information and make sound, decisions in real time? It's like near impossible. And then, you talk about that fatigue of the alert fatigue, but even if you were like some major processing individual, the stuff has to be consolidated, summarized, and prioritized across the board. So I think, we've got to look at a SaaS type of, overall. So I'd love your thoughts on this, Harshal, where the line between good and bad, out there is becoming blurred. There's good websites, there's good applications, there's bad. I mean, it actually can depend on a given day. I play Words with Friends, and I ran an update over the weekend, and it completely was a horrible update, and it made my phone turn into a brick for several hours. And it was a software flaw that, thank God my husband had the patience to go figure out what the bug was. But that's just some stupid Words with Friends app, but it completely incapacitated my phone for several hours. So think about something like that, out there, and you've been playing something, using that application for a good amount of time. So I should have, trusted but verified, at the end of the day. So how can us as organizations, best embrace a zero trust architecture? And I know there's some stigma out there for certain types of applications and parts of the organization. It's not practical, but, for us to safely download from websites and documents and collaborate now that we're working from everywhere, you've got to think about it from a much broader level versus sort of that stigma, I think, overall. What do you think?
I think the attacks are going to get sophisticated. There are attacks being launched, call it nation state or script kiddies. They are going to come up with significant sophistication. Now there's another buzzword I'm going to throw in, ChatGPT AI. They are going to come up with something very significant, which your traditional security tools is not going to be able to react. And I think that's a good introduction to a tool like a SASE or a behavioral based tool, which sits and monitors not just the what is the norm. Harshal comes in every day and does 1, 2, 3. Suddenly Harshal does 4 and 5, which doesn't look like a norm. And in this scenario where Jim's saying, the fatigue comes in because if you have multiple tools talking to each other, the message is somewhere getting lost. With a single tool sitting there at the perimeter, you can have that multiple sets of eyes with the same data, giving that triggers, which a normal tool is going to miss. So having that single consolidation at a SASE level or a zero trust level, first of all, is going to solve your fatigue problem. The second problem is the principle in itself. Zero trust in itself says you do not trust, you authenticate or you put in, more controls, which is, it's just a buzzword now. But if you go back, this was the normal principle of how we architected the network, either through a firewall or, through a layer switches. I think this is coming back now with much more sophistication, is give them X resources. Don't give them the entire stack. If they only need X, give them X. And then you add on the more layers of applications or data when they need it. I think by default, organizations just over permissive and give over provisioning of applications, which is a simplest problem which we have right now. So that's number 2. And the number 3 is coming back to the hygiene. I strongly believe, with everything happening on sophistication, automation, if you keep your security stack simple, if all the tools are talking and intending to operate as it intends to, and you have a good monitoring response process, you're still going to get through 95% of the threats. And 5% you just have mercy at something like a supply chain or something which you're not prepared to. So I think the principles are very simple: is keep it simple, leverage tools which are talking to each other, and do the basics right.
Absolutely. You talk about the hygiene. So I want to kind of shift gears over to Jim for a second. Hygiene is so important, but our critical data, we're finding to be really everywhere across the board. So, and the importance of demonstrating value with our investments, our security investments, is really in the forefront. But when you have the disparate systems out there and the data integrity issues across the board, how can we adopt a data security life cycle type of approach? And how can we share that with our folks here that are tuning in today?
Yeah.
Some of the best practices.
Yeah. I think that's a really key question, because when you look at today's topics, zero trust, SASE, the first thing right off is they aren't products in them of themselves. You don't go buy a zero trust. You don't go buy a SASE. Zero trust is a set of principles. It used to be a very academic thing 15, 20 years ago. Then 10 years ago, it became sort of a set of best practices that the specialists dealt with. Now it's just common sense. It's just baked into how security is done, which is people have to have permission for everything that they do, everything that they touch, and as Harshal was saying, not just can you get to it, but what can you do with it? And SASE is an architecture that, yes, it brings together several different types of services, but ultimately it acts as a delivery vehicle for those kinds of security services, for those kinds of hygiene services. And what we're seeing over the coming couple of years is the way that most organizations around the world are telling us that they're approaching this problem is, first off, no one is saying go climb the cliff or go step or go step off a mountain and completely change everything. It's solve the problems that you have to solve today. And that could be, how do I secure data that's in Office 365 or in Google Workspace? All right. How do I make sure that the right people from the right kinds of devices are being able to use data properly? And that zero trust becomes simply the sorts of things that you allow people to do. And that the key is taking a very almost sort of stepwise approach of saying, first, solve the most pressing problems. Where is your most critical data, and who should have access to it, and what kind of business processes, not technical ones, business processes, do you want to have people follow? And the technology follows. What's nice about SASE as an architecture is it's designed to enable that, where you can solve a problem today, but increasingly with a platform that provides other services, so that in time, when you go to solve a similar problem, say, let's say you've got your cloud app, data secured, to your satisfaction, you're happy. You even got it synchronizing with your endpoint laptop so that the same policies are enforced in both places. And then people start asking, okay, well, what about all the websites, shadow IT or other random websites? We have all these controls about what data can go somewhere. Can we do something about that? A SASE architecture allows that to become an incremental turn on a few additional services, rather than let's go start over from scratch. Let's figure out, how do we synchronize policies across disparate systems? And instead, it's intended to really make it something where you can simply think of it as, okay, I'm going to take the next byte, which is another channel of information, and then after that, I'm going to tackle those business applications that are stubbornly clinging to the data center, internally, and be able to basically apply the same business processes, same types of management, same kinds of reporting, and so forth to that. So it's all about removing silos of systems, replacing it with a platform that can be used incrementally and not all at once. So in some ways, talking about SASE, sometimes I get people saying, well, it sounds scary because it sounds like you're asking me to throw out a whole bunch of systems. And the answer is, while as many customers like to say, for every new system you bring in, I need to replace 2 other systems. And while it helps in that regard, it is absolutely not a throw the baby out with the bathwater right up front. Instead, go on a journey, according to the way you want your business to operate. So finally, we have security technology that's beginning to follow how business operates, rather than dictating how business should change the way it operates.
Absolutely. So some of the things that kind of stood out to me, around SASE, it really should be protecting our sensitive data, especially when it's moving across the organization, and preventing threats like malware from being, injected, while the users are being able to access the things they need to do their jobs, from, whether the trusted site or whether the site's unknown, and everything like that. But how are you, Gabe, kind of thinking about zero trust here by trying to keep the data, your sensitive data secure, especially when it's everywhere and it's in the cloud, it's in a website, it's in an app, it's in your computer. God only knows where sometimes it is located, overall. So there's so much data nonstop moving across our enterprises, both inside, like the traditional inside of the organization, as well as just the peripheral outside and back and forth. So I'd love to get your perspective here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, complexity is the enemy, right? And everything seems to be rising in complexity. There's more places and more services that you depend on every day to get your job done. And not all of them live in your environment anymore, right? It's all over the place, as you mentioned. And really, I think the cool thing about what's going on with these solutions in the space is that it isn't about the technology, as Jim said. It's about defining what people need to be able to do and being able to express that in policy, and having either your endpoint or your gateways or your applications understand this policy and being able to define it in those places and continuously evaluate that policy to make sure that the condition still meets what is appropriate for that kind of access, and only the access that's needed in a simpler way makes this like extremely wonderful, right? It simplifies that giant hairball of complexity that's going on there by drawing tighter circles around the solutions that your users are depending upon, right? So no longer are you saying there's inside and there's outside and that's it. That creates this giant complex world where you can't figure out what are the dependencies of this application. But by being able to say, my users need this data and they need to get to it in this way, and all of the infrastructure behind that is in its own little circle, and they can't reach that. They reach the legitimate path only. That really makes my job monitoring, securing, understanding what's going on, provisioning, so much simpler to do. So it's kind of an interesting thing. The explosion in complexity you're talking about is driving us to think harder about how do we define what it is that people need. And then that makes it easier because you've got some roles that they can just use. Not everything is a new snowflake. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, you're right. So, I mean, it's so important, as we're kind of to align with our businesses, because each of our businesses have some different aspects to them. So it's certainly not a one size fits all that makes us run and operate. There's obviously some commonality on some of the technology infrastructure, but with a zero trust strategy, overall, it allows us, I think, to offer like a strategic approach that replaces that implicit, trust factor with continually assessed explicit trust, which is huge and different, to really kind of unpack it and think about it because of how we've traditionally thought about this across the board. And I think what's the huge advantage here is it really allows us to adapt to an organization and their risk appetite, because we always talk about managing to these risk appetites. And, is it really make sense to spend, $200,000 on a solution when we're simply trying to protect something that the fines and penalties and everything is valued at $10,000, right? So you kind of have to do a business evaluation and manage to that risk. But what is the, brand exposure across the board? So when we're kind of dealing with a lot of different things out there at the same time, and then we've added another layer of complexity, I'm going to throw a curveball at all of us, is all this governance and security and privacy requirements across the board on a state-by-state basis, here in the US, on a country-by-country basis. I mean, you want to pull your hair out some days and you really think about how to manage to all that across the board. So, Gabe, I'm going to go to you, back to you. With the uncertainty of the economy out there and sort of this very complicated, ever-evolving geopolitical landscape out there, and you are a global company, and I know you're part of, you lead the charge here in North America, but I'm going to play some words on here around being Toyota, but how do you gain a lot of mileage by educating our enterprises so that we can realize a cyber asset maintenance policy and safety are really part of our value proposition, and incorporating that into with SASE and a zero trust principle?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and for us, I really like to use the automobile metaphors, right? Because that's something we
That's
know
why I
and
put
live.
mileage in your question.
Exactly, and so I'm always using this idea of when you get a car, you've got to do maintenance, you've got to do regular services, you've got to think about how to understand how the controls work. All of those things translate into using of technology, and you can You can apply those things incrementally. You don't have to know what every feature in your car does to drive down the street, but as you go, slowly making sure that the right things are on and ready to go, and taking that incremental approach Jim talked about finding the areas where your current solution isn't flexible enough to accommodate the dynamic business need that you have, or isn't meeting the new regulatory requirements that you're finding yourselves with all the new privacy requirements that in the US are state by state, making it even more difficult to figure out what the right answer is. You can carve out from a risk standpoint, what are the key things that I need to make in my business more available, easier to use, and more secure, and use that as the starting place for your new SASE zero trust kind of area. All the other stuff can still run the way it is today, and you can start making things easier and incrementally and agilely expand that deployment. And that's kind of the strategy that we've taken, as kind of building it in some areas, and then as we need to expand it and use it and make it available to the network of global enterprises that we are part of, makes all of that kind of available technology that's really paved road for getting those solutions solved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to shift back to Herschel for a second. So, for security leaders, and you touched on this earlier, it is so important for us to work with the lines of business leaders out there and our boards and our colleagues overall, so that we can develop, I think, some foundational aspects around zero trust overall. So how can we explain this type of collaboration in sort of layman's terms to our colleagues, and they really and have it align with the business with the business just in general? So how do we do that? And I think we can't talk, bits and bytes across the board and use all these lingo and stuff like that. But how do we just put this in a perspective of it helps the bottom line and brings value and opportunity to our company?
Yeah, I think we touched a little bit, and Jim also mentioned is, I think the guiding principle of zero trust is to bring in efficiency to the business. Less tools, easier from a management of, resources, and bringing back efficiency either through resources or better utilization to the business. When we go to the business or my peers, the first thing is, how are we enabling them to do work faster and better? Because that's what exactly they are there to service the customers or the travelers in our industry. Is efficiency is at the heart of everything, bringing an umbrella of security, because everything can be fast and secure, they would take it. So I think that's the advantages we have to show from a layman or technical languages perspective, to showcase with the new architecture what's going to change. How is the application access or the resource access is going to change for good or bad. If there's a zero, and this is my understanding, is from a SASE perspective, there's zero impact to the end users. They would not know what they're accessing. It's so transparent to them, as they're not able to feel the difference, which is amazing from an end user. Is, oh, we didn't even notice the difference. In fact, we notice a positive effect on our endpoint, because now two tools suddenly which were sitting there eating resources are gone. So I think those are some of the touch points and data points which can articulate the story well, because at the end of the day, they want to see how are we doing it better, and tag teaming with the security landscape to provide a good services to our end users.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Jim, before we kind of jump into the questions, I would love for you to kind of give us some takeaways of how us as security executives can demonstrate that value add and purpose and justification for SASE with a zero trust principle, so that we can demonstrate that value add as security executives, across the board, especially right now.
I think we're going to see that that's one of the new frontiers that the industry is really driving towards. Vendors are beginning to respond. We've been working with customers. We have a way of presenting information that connects the dots across all of the different types of access services, and ultimately we're going to have it tied into all of the products that we offer, so that rather than bits and bytes or log files or things like that, that it really needs to be focused on the metrics that people are using as they measure productivity, as they're measuring the things that matter in the business, and getting away from the low-level details of, well, this many incidents over here, to instead map that into a financial model and to be able to provide a running dashboard. We have, in our case, we have this baked into our platform. And one CIO that we were talking to early on, as we're getting their feedback on what they'd like to see in it, basically told us, I'm going to mount a very large flat panel outside my office running this dashboard, so everybody walks by my office is able to see it, and to see the measure of the economic impact that having these kinds of security solutions in place is providing to the business. Because at the end of the day, talk to Harshal, talk to Gabe, and their jobs are to keep the organization safe, and we all, as customers of theirs, greatly appreciate that. But even more so, their job now is really how to enable the business to be innovative and to be more agile and to do things that the line of business leaders may not have even thought of as possible. And so being able to connect the dots to the financial outcomes is really what I would say is the next big thing that is coming in the security solutions industry for exactly the reasons that you're outlining.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for kind of putting together some of our key takeaways today. We've got a few questions up here, and I want to make sure we try to get to them as many as possible. VJ, thanks for joining us today. And I see that the document expired with the Gartner report. We will send out a recap tomorrow of that and get a better link for you. Apologies on that overall. So we will take care of that for you and get that over to you and the whole crew here today. So let's see, from Ray Malik, what is the best way to implement zero trust? So who wants to take that on? Jim, do you want to take that on, or?
Sure, I'm happy to start off, but I'd love to hear from Gabe and Harshal. I think the key is to start off with the mindset that zero trust is not the thing. It is the way you do security. And so it begins, as Harshal and Gabe were talking about, getting away from a model that simply says, great, barn doors open. If you have any kind of access at all, you're free to go do anything to any data anywhere. And so as organizations begin to really understand what data they have, what applications they have, who needs to use it. Gabe was talking about going through some of that. I think that's the very first step, is to really figure out what you have, figure out not only what you have, who you have. How do those things go together? And I don't mean in writing an encyclopedia, but even just beginning to break things into bite-sized pieces is really key, because then modern technologies can help you to enforce, to say, all right, well, these people can get to these applications, and on my corporate laptops, I'm going to allow them to download information, but I do want them to be able to use their phones for productivity, but to keep control of information, I'm not going to allow them to download information on those devices. These are the kinds of things that you can do, and then start focused. If you're an O365 customer, how am I going to manage the data that's stored in SharePoint? All right, solve that. How can I synchronize it then with my laptop? Solve that. Ideally the same way. And then branch off from there.
All right. Does anyone want to add to that before I go on to the next question?
I can add. I think it goes back to, Jim, you very well pointed out, is your risk assessment. Goes back to what are the risks or what are the business problems you're trying to solve. Once you know the problems, it's a journey. It's not you bring in a tool and you're done. SASE is done or zero trust is done. you have to pick up your risk appetite, you have to pick up the applications, the data mine, which is core to you, and then put controls. SASE is one of the control, which is going to help you in that journey of zero trust. So I think it goes back to your risk assessment, risk discussion, understanding it's got to be like a 3-year journey, put in guardrails, and from there move and keep on optimizing to be completely on a zero trust implementation.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's starting incremental is key, because you've got to learn how to adapt things to the new model. And doing the giant magic wand, everything is now zero trust is not realistic, right? And by finding a place, either like Herschel says, where you're looking at the risk and you need to up your controls, or even a place where your existing controls aren't flexible enough to accommodate the business need, and you've got to find a new way to make that thing available, where in the past you were saying, no, you can't have that. This can become the tool to sort of expand and enable the business to do things that it wants to do that it hasn't been able to do before. And you can leave the swamp, that's what I like to call all the old stuff, where it was, and slowly pull things out of that swamp as you need to and bring them into the modern, shiny, wonderful new world.
Absolutely. So our next question is from Che Chang. What differentiates ForcePoint from CASB solutions out there? Jim, I'm going to let you answer this one, and then we'll jump into Todd's question after that.
Sure. So CASB is one of a number of capabilities that is built into the ForcePoint 1 SSE platform. So we have, in fact, one of the market leading CASBs out there. It was recognized by Gartner's Magic Quadrant for CASB as a leader 3 times in a row, and it's at the core of our platform. So I think the broader question is, what is the role of that in what we're talking about today? Rather than focusing on the technologies, we focus more on what they do. And so the role of CASB began as a way of controlling access to cloud applications, and it has really grown in the last few years to actually just as important, if not more importantly, to be the vehicle for enforcing data security policies up in those cloud applications. And so what we and certainly other CASBs out there that are modern provide the ability to ensure that the data that you've got in all of your major cloud applications fits your policies. And that may range from, is it stored in an encrypted format up in the cloud or not? Is it accessible by only certain people? Can it be downloaded or not? And the value of a SASE architecture of having these gateways allows you to define policies and to layer this kind of visibility and control over top of cloud applications, and whether they're public, whether they're in your private data center, wherever, without having to modify the application. And so that's where the real power is. And that's where, in many ways, CASB is one of the core elements of a SASE architecture. And the same tenets apply to internal private applications as well as to the web.
Thank you very much, Jim. We have one more question from Todd Fitzgerald. If you were starting down the SASE path, what would be the 3 most high-value projects that you would like to do first to demonstrate quick wins? And I know we talked about that is the key beneficiary or reasons to do it. So what would be the top 3 things to kind of pick from our wish list overall?
The 3 that our customers tell us about typically begin with having a consistent form of data security for cloud applications and their corporate endpoint devices, their laptops, and then branching that out to other channels like the web and so forth. The second thing that people tend to tell us, and it's somewhat in this order, but not necessarily, is the whole topic of how do you deal with those web-based or other applications that are sitting in a data center and they're not in the cloud yet. However, all of the visibility and control that you now have, in our prior discussion about CASB, you want that same applications are applications. You want that same visibility and control no matter where they live. And so, Gabe talked about the pain that we all went through in spinning up massive numbers of VPNs during the pandemic. And the great sigh that happened about a year ago as organizations came out and said, "Can we please get rid of these? These are hideous." And that's where new technologies like zero trust network access, or the alphabet soup of ZTNA, it's really just about saying, treat your internal private apps the same way. But the big benefit there is getting rid of the cost, expense, and impediment to productivity that VPNs are. The final thing, we didn't talk as much about networking, but in a SASE architecture brings together both security and networking so that you're able to avoid gaps and redundancies between the two. And what we're seeing, especially with the return to office happening, is organizations looking at how can they, as Harshal was talking about, how can they optimize both spending and operations of the infrastructure for connecting those remote sites, branch offices, and so forth, so that the same security technologies can be used, whether someone's working at home, if they then come into the office, that the security is seamless and the offices can be connected to the internet inexpensively instead of through the archaic, old, really costly, slow mechanisms that we were all used to a few years ago. And now we're getting to a world where the security can keep up with the way people work, by saying, great, I don't care whether you're working from home, from a Starbucks, from an office, or out in some branch at the other end of the planet. It's all going to be the same. And that's really the key to the future, because that is about unlocking the potential that everyone has, in their jobs, and not trying to force them into a little box based on the limitations of the technology.
Well, thank you, Jim. Does anyone have anything quickly to add? Because we need to wind down today. I went by so fast overall, so I guess not. But thank you so much, Harshal, and thank you for Gabe, and thank you, Jim, and thank you, ForcePoint, for being with us today and sharing your perspectives and insights. We are so grateful for your time and your knowledge of sharing it. And I want to say thank you so much to everybody at home or wherever you're working from right now for joining us. I want to wish everybody a happy holiday. Please do tell us what you thought. In the chat window, there is a survey. We love your feedback about today's program. I learned some new things too, so I hope that you did as well. And we want to make sure that you get your CPE credits. So do let us know that you need those CPE credits, and we will send you that letter acknowledging that you joined us today. If you are interested in getting in touch with ForcePoint, we recommend that you reach out to Linda Minto, who's the Senior Field Marketing Manager at ForcePoint, and she can be reached at linda.minto, M-I-N-T-O, at forcepoint.com. And join us. We still have a few more things coming up before the end of the year. A couple of ISE private dinners. We have a couple of ISE Fireside webinars. And then, of course, we'll take a little bit of a break over the holidays and see you guys in 2024. But it has been a wonderful afternoon with all of you. Appreciate all of you. And again, have a wonderful holiday season. And we look forward to seeing you next time. And thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you. And thank you once again to ForcePoint.
Thank you, Marcy.
Thanks, everyone.